Ready? Are you ready? Now last week I asked if you were ready to get in the game, and we received a real enthusiastic yes, ready to get in the game. So today we come together this morning to ask the question, are you ready to fan the flame?
Yes.
Well, I'm liking this all good because we're doing an interactive thing later on, so good. That's great. Because I'm sure that you will all enthusiastically say yes to this, but really, do you know what it means to fan the flame? Bill kind of gave you a hint, but perhaps it's obvious to you, and perhaps it's not obvious. It's the fire within, the flame within. Learning how to fan the flame within. Now, Ernest Holmes wrote in his Science of Mind book, which I'm going to be quoting today, the spark which burns at the center of our own soul is caught from the living and eternal flame of the Spirit. It's that spark which is in with each and every one of us that I am referring to this morning. The spark that is part of the eternal flame. The flame of oneness, where we each have within us that God spark. Each and every one of us has that essence within us, that God essence within us. Sometimes it's really covered up, but it is there. It is present. And the deeper our understanding is of this eternal, internal flame, the more that we ignite it and we start to fan it. And he also wrote, Ernest Holmes, in his book, because he uses the flame and the spark of divinity as a metaphor throughout his Science of Mind book. He also wrote, and I quoted this in my newsletter for those of you who wrote it, or read it, I wrote it. But Ernest Holmes wrote this, when we separate ourselves from the divine fire, we become like an isolated spark. We are strong only when united with life. That is why Jesus said he could do nothing of himself, but could work only as the currents of divinity ran through his personal mentality. It is only as we live in conscious union, he wrote, with the Spirit, and consciously let it work through us that we really live. And so that last sentence is the key statement for this talk this morning, so I'll read it again. It is only as we live in conscious union with the Spirit and consciously let it work through us that we really live. And that's the flame I'm asking you this morning if you are ready to fan. That's the flame we're going to speak about. It's the flame of living in conscious union with Spirit, with God. Spirit with God, and consciously letting it work through you so that you really might live a good life, a great life, a joyful life. So in order to be vibrant, fully alive, we need to fan the flame of God within. In fact, we need to ignite it. We need to recognize, we ignite it by recognizing it. That's the source. That's the true source of our happiness. Remember, it's an inside job, so it always begins within. And then the outer are the experiences that we get to enjoy that enrich our lives. But it always begins within. And that's when we begin to experience and express life as abundant, powerful, joyful God beings. Because we're God beings. Like that? You're a God being. We are all God beings in reality. And that's how we can move into becoming transformative lights in the world, to shine our light, because we each have an individualized light within us. And I love this statement by Ernest Holmes. I love it very much. As the Christ awakens our divine spark, shot from the central fires of universal flame, it is then able to warm other souls by the radiance of his own self-unfoldment. And Jesus said the same thing when he said, if I be lifted up, others will be lifted up also. Remember, he was the example. He came to show us how to live in oneness. The Father and I are one. Over and over again we say that because that is the unity of all life. And when we really deepen into that, then we can start to ignite that flame within each of us. So he was teaching about the spark of oneness. He was teaching that. So are you ready for that? Yes. 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 All right. Just warming you up for the... Then it requires some conscious action on your part. It's not all mental. Remember, it's activity. There's an action part to this that we're going to get into. Johnny Coleman, in her book, Open Your Mind and Be Healed, wrote, "The life principle resides in our souls, ready, willing, and able to respond to our command. But it cannot force itself upon us. We must activate its potential." See, there's that action again. We must activate its potential. And that's where fanning the flame comes in. And that's what we are going to be talking about this morning. Now, I realized that last Sunday, if you were here last Sunday, you know, I was pretty long-winded. There were a lot of little... What? You weren't even here. There were a lot of points and sub-points in my my football analogy stories, and the thing is that at some point in the middle of the message, I noticed that a man had left the room, and he didn't return until the very end of the service. And so after the service was finished, I asked him where he'd gone. He said he went to get a haircut. I said, "Couldn't you do that before service?" To which he replied, "But I didn't need one then." So
There's a drummer when you need that.
Okay. Not so today, because today I have one simple point to make. So none of you can have to leave. I'm watching the door, too. Yeah, I'm watching the door. Come on in. That's the guy that left last week. Come on in. So I have some practical counsel for today, okay? And so remember that what we teach here is a practical spirituality. We want you to be able to learn how to use it. Not just to come here on Sundays and feel good and uplifted, and then the next day forget it. It's a practical spirituality. So the simple point that I want to make is this. We activate the potential in us. We fan the flame of our divinity when we live in conscious union with Spirit, when we get on purpose. So we're going to be talking about that. When we get on purpose. You have a purpose. You have a purpose. Within you there is a purpose, and that purpose will not leave you unless it is fulfilled. Each and every one of us has a purpose within us. Did you know that? Did you know that you have a purpose within you?
Yes.
Yes. Each and every one of you. It's that thing that you sometimes don't feel fulfilled in. But it will actually be like, sometimes it'll feel like the pea under the mattress that the princess slept on. You know, and it won't go away until you discover it. Until you discover it. You might postpone its fulfillment for years. But because God implanted this purpose at the center of your being where it cannot be lost. It cannot be erased. And it can be kind of forgotten, but it's still there. It's still there. We can temporarily forget it, sometimes for a very, very long time. And we can argue against it. Pretend that it isn't there. Yet because God has put it there, we cannot erase it. We cannot erase it. We cannot lose it. It's part of our eternal self. When each and every one within each and every one is this divine purpose. Okay, it's all there. We're going to do some things this morning to help you maybe get in touch with it a little bit. So, what is this purpose that I speak of? What is this purpose? What's your purpose? It isn't to win the lottery, even though that might be really good. I mean, wonderful. It isn't to be chosen as the CEO of your company, although that might happen, and that's good also. It isn't to become savior of the world, and you may or may not do that. Your purpose isn't to marry a certain person. It isn't to take a trip around the world. These are not your purpose. These are all experiences and activities that add to our lives, but you know what your purpose is when you really get in touch with it and you feel it and it pulls you into the direction where you really feel alive. Your purpose is to awaken to you and what you are in God and who and what God is in you. Now that I've said that, and I think those words are wonderful and absolutely true, what do they mean to us? What do they really mean to us in a practical, day-to-day sense? Two fundamental elements exist in a purpose of awakening to who you are and who God is in you. And that is, those two fundamental elements are joy and service. So Reverend Kathleen and I are pretty good at, we have joy in our titles, right? Joy and service. And I'll explain that. What brings you joy? What brings you joy? How does it show up in the world, and how does it serve? How does it serve the world? And there are many, many ways to define your purpose. Now, we used visioning. If you're not familiar with that, we did do it a couple of weeks ago, right here in service. We did a short visioning, which is a very powerful spiritual tool on our life's purpose. We did that. And so visioning is one of the ways that you can activate and get in touch with the divine's highest purpose for your life. And then there's a very powerful, extremely simple exercise in Jack Canfield's book that I spoke of last week, Success Principles. And it involves spending a little time in quiet reflection and then asking yourself these three questions, these statements. And I'm going to give them to you in 3 questions. Reverend Jessica was going to be doing this with me, but since she's waiting to get heat and hot water, we have asked the treasurer